Were Daniel Lugo's actions cruel or comical? In the mid-1990s, the Sun Gym wasn't just a place to pump iron. It was ground zero for a group of characters caught up in a whirlwind of crime and chaos. At the center of it all was Daniel Lugo, the gym's manager and a man with big dreams and a taste for the finer things in life. But Daniel wasn't content with just running a gym. He wanted the world, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get it. He gathered a motley crew of gym rats and hangers-on, forming what would later be known as the Sun Gym Gang. With Noel Doorbal, Carl Weeks, and Stephenson Pierre by his side, Daniel cooked up a plan to kidnap and extort a man named Marc Schiller, a business associate of one of the gym's regulars. Despite their muscle and insider knowledge, the gang's first attempts at nabbing Schiller were downright comical. They lurked in his yard dressed as ninjas, only to be scared off by passing cars. What followed was a nightmare for Schiller, as the gang tortured and terrorized him for weeks, forcing him to sign over his assets under threat of violence against his family. They even tried to stage his death in a car crash, but Schiller miraculously survived. But the gang wasn't done yet. Their sights soon turned to Frank Griga, a millionaire entrepreneur, and his girlfriend Krisztina Furton. What started as a scheme to extort them ended in tragedy when Griga was accidentally killed during a struggle, and Furton overdosed on drugs administered by Daniel himself. With 2 more bodies on their hands, the gang went to gruesome lengths to cover their tracks, dismembering the victims and dumping their remains in the Florida marshes. But their crimes didn't go unnoticed for long, and soon the law was hot on their trail. Daniel was eventually captured in the Bahamas and brought back to face justice along with several other members of the gang. Their trial was one of the longest and most expensive in Miami's history, but in the end, they were all sentenced to prison, or, in Daniel's case, to death. Should Chris Benoit be remembered as a villain or a victim of CTE? On June 25, 2007, a concerned WWE requested a welfare check on Benoit after he missed several events without notice. When the police arrived at his Fayetteville, Georgia home, they made a grim discovery. The bodies of Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their 7-year-old son Daniel were found. Authorities quickly determined that Benoit had killed his wife and son over a 3-day period before taking his own life. Nancy had been bound, and Daniel was drugged with Xanax and likely unconscious when Benoit strangled him. Benoit then hanged himself on his lat pull-down machine. There was no evidence of roid rage involved in the tragic events. Further investigation into steroid abuse in wrestling revealed that Benoit had been illegally given steroids and other medications in February 2006. In the aftermath, neuroscientist and former wrestler Christopher Nowinski reached out to Benoit's father, Michael, suggesting that years of brain trauma could have contributed to Benoit's actions. Tests conducted on his brain showed severe damage resembling that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. This advanced form of dementia, similar to conditions found in retired NFL players with multiple concussions, was believed to have contributed to his severe behavioral problems.
Did you know that the henchman from Austin Powers is serving a life sentence in prison? In 2008, Joe's son was arrested for kicking in the door of his roommate's car. As part of a plea deal, Son was required to provide a DNA sample to the authorities. When his sample was run through the system, it linked him to a horrific, nearly 2-decade-old cold case. On Christmas Eve in 1990, he and an accomplice pretended to be lost as they approached a 19-year-old woman walking her dog. They her into their car and subjected her to hours of. During the ordeal, Son made chilling comments about giving himself a present. Son was convicted of 1 count of felony torture. The statute of limitations had run out on the assault charges and sentenced to 7 years to life. Just a month after beginning his sentence, Son was involved in a violent altercation that resulted in his cellmate's death. He was convicted of voluntary manslaughter and sentenced to an additional 27 years.